Now, okay, as you probably know, I use a lot of whiteboard, and so I want to test whether when I draw this like that, is it quite clear to everyone? The cloth practical that when we do the advanced materials in week 2, the students are able to follow complex concepts in week 2 that are built on the assumption that they have mastered the basic materials in week 1. So in order to make sure that you do your work in an intensive module, the test is meant to allow you to ensure that you are ready for week 2. And so week 1 are all the basic concepts I have to teach you. At the end of week 1, you will be able to understand what a double tax treaty is about, what cross-border taxation is all about. And week 2, we will then do some planning, a tax planning across countries and borders. So that's what we hope to do. It used to be an MCQ test for which generally half the class will fail, but then this year, because it's e-learning, and I'm going to try to move away. So you'll be the first batch without MCQ test. We will give you a little short paper. I won't tell you what it is, but your job is to ensure that this week you stay on top of your materials. You read them at the end of every day. After class, you have to go and read your materials. Don't fall behind in an intensive module. Okay, so that will contribute. That will carry 30% of your final grade. Carry 30% of your final grade, and then 70% will be a take-home paper. That's the final exam for all of you. Okay. Okay. Good. Let's get started. Most of you, I believe, have no tax background, and if you look at the syllabus, if we just take a look at the okay, let's when I open that. Okay, I trust you can see the reading list here. Now, this is going to be an introduction to taxation, and this will put everybody to be able to understand and differentiate between taxation and all other kinds of charges we pay in life as the way a society is organized. So if you find that this will be all we're going to deal with, intro to taxation, and then I'll give you an overview of how income tax is imposed on entities and individuals. Basically, how tax is computed. All right, I'll go through that. And the next few classes, all the way until Friday, we will cover all the key concepts in cross-border taxation. And in order to go through all these, the problem with some teaching is that students don't know where we are going, at which point we are. So it's just like a GPS map. You want to know exactly where your destination is and your starting point. You want to know where you are. It's like tracking a parcel. You want to be able to track. So what I'll do later on is to help you track where we are going, so that at every class you know exactly what we are trying to do. Okay, so you can have your reading list opened, and this is exactly the part we're going to go into right now. Okay, what is taxation? Let's get to groups of taxation. Now, taxation, it's so when we look at tax, what do we mean by tax? So first, when we are looking at the concept of tax, we know it is compulsory. So you have no choice, it is compulsory. You have to pay a tax, and that the attribute is that it must be compulsory, and that it is collected by a public authority. So a public authority collects it, and the money is used for public purposes. And it is not a payment for goods and services. So if you look at the key concept of tax, if you apply to your understanding of tax, you will know that first is a compulsory exaction. So that means it is an authorized confiscation of private property. So if you earn $100 and the state says $20 belong to the tax authority, and on that basis, it is compulsory. And the 20% bigger. In just a minute, yeah. Is it not clear? Small, okay. Okay, I'll try. I'm given feedback to write a little bigger. So it's compulsory, and it is so the $100, $20 the state say belongs to us, and they call it income tax. So you make $100 gain in your activity, and the state says we'll levy a 20% tax, and the 20% is now confiscated by the state. So it's a compulsory exaction of money, and the state is a public authority, and if you don't want to pay, it's enforceable. It's enforceable in the sense that if you don't pay, it's a debt owed to the government, and they can take all steps to enforce it against you, a taxpayer, including taking their property and liquidating them to pay the tax. So if you roughly understand this, then you realize that this is what tax is all about. Yeah, and the money goes towards public use. And very often when you pay taxes, you do not get anything back. So we call that a black hole. It goes into the state, and the state uses the money to build transport, schools, hospitals. So for everybody's use, so that is like common property. So this is a common property. You contribute to this fund that is for everybody to enjoy. All right, so that would be a basic concept in tax. Now, when we say a tax, how do we contrast it, for example, for the purposes of tax? How do we contrast that to say, how do we contrast that to charge? So when we contrast that to charge, okay, when the state imposes a charge on a person, so what do we mean by impose a charge? So basically, it is a payment for goods or services. So it's a payment for goods or services, and there is a benefit that is received by the payer. And next, the entity that receives the money can make a profit. So the difference between a charge and a tax is that first, you could say, for example, collect payment for goods and services provided, and it's almost voluntary. You want to enjoy this benefit, you pay, and you enjoy the benefit of goods and services. And the provider may make profit out of this transaction. Anybody wants to give an example of what might be a charge? I've given you an example of what is a tax, like income tax, like VAT. What will be a charge?
Maybe a toll for the highway.
Yeah, that'll be a good example. A toll on a highway, you want to use the highway, and you get a benefit to use the connection and the infrastructure built on the highway. Now, typically, you now know that governments, long time ago, fund the construction of infrastructure through taxes collected as a fund. So the state collects money and operates a budget and uses the money to build highways and hospitals. Now, you notice that the regulation of government, the administration of the modern state, many governments have moved away from that model, and they do this private-public partnership in which the state grants a private entity the right to collect a payment for providing the benefit in exchange for the private entity paying for the construction of the highway. And that takes away the expenses and the burden from the state. So it is a kind of an outsourcing and giving the right to the private provider to participate in public infrastructure. So that's really an example of a charge. Then we then look at the concept of a penalty. So some people say a tax is like a penalty for being successful. You make money, and then the state says, I'm going to collect $20 out of your success and your gains. Now here, what's a penalty? A penalty sounds like a tax, but it's not. A penalty usually is imposed for the failure to fulfill an antecedent obligation. So what do we mean by a failure to fulfill an antecedent obligation? So first, if you focus on the words, first, there is a failure. You did not meet a particular condition, and the particular condition is called an antecedent obligation. So let's say you hadn't paid your taxes on time. So, and you failed to file your tax returns on time. The state or the income tax statute will generally provide for a penalty, and that becomes a penalty, and the antecedent obligation is the obligation to pay taxes on time. And if 31st March is the deadline, then the failure to meet that deadline attracts a penalty, and that's called a failure to fulfill antecedent, which is a preceding obligation. So you have to pay. So at that point in time, you're required to pay a obligation. 30 days down the road, you fail to do that, a penalty is levied. You fail to return your library books on time. You fail to pay your tuition fee on time. So these are the antecedent obligations. So these are related concepts in which we seek to at least get everybody familiar with the concept. Now, the last thing I want to discuss is fine. Now, when you are fined for illegal parking, when you're fined for speeding, what's the difference between a fine, a penalty, and a tax and a charge? So when we say a fine, it's the same. The state is a compulsory exaction. Again, it's by a public authority. The fines go into a public fund. It's not a payment and it's enforceable. So it sounds like tax. There's one key difference between a fine and a tax. When you owe a tax, it is a debt. When you are faced with a fine, the failure to pay the fine can be converted into imprisonment. All right. So here we have a key difference between tax and a fine. So the failure to pay the fine, there is usually a conversion rate. It's like a currency exchange rate. So if you fail to pay $10,000 fine, you could end up in jail for 3 months. So there is a conversion. So it can be converted into a term of imprisonment, the failure to pay the fine. So fine, usually the behavior is because of conduct that attracts criminal liability. You are fined. Conduct that attracts civil, that means the failure to pay on time, antecedent contractual obligation or statutory obligation, you pay a penalty. Failure to behave yourself attracts criminal behavior, you can be sentenced to jail or pay a fine, and the failure to pay a fine could result in a will. Whereas tax, it is compulsory, it is again all these things, but you can never be put in jail for failing to pay tax. You could just have all your property taken away to fulfill the debt. And this, of course, is the most commercial of the lot, in the sense that when you pay for services, you benefit, you contract for these things. So it is just like subscribing to a country club, joining a social organization, you pay a fee for getting certain services. Except, of course, the provider generally is part of the state to be able to collect these services from public. Okay, that gives us an idea about what's the difference between charges and taxes. So 4 key concepts, okay? Take some thoughts. Are we good to carry on? Or you have questions you want to raise? We can carry on? Yep. Okay, so I know most of you are not on video mode, but it's the easiest for me is because I can see all you guys here on the screen, and if you just nod your head, easy. I mean, if you don't mind sharing your video, then it's very easy for me to get an instant feedback. Yeah. So if you just get an instant feedback, I will roughly know that you have no questions, and then we can carry on. Okay, can we carry on? Okay, good. All these are recorded, and therefore the pictures will be there, so you don't really have to copy and take notes out of this. Yeah. And what are the functions of tax? The second point on the reading list, we're going to deal with functions of taxation. So, anybody wants to offer a reason why we might want to collect taxes? What is the purpose? What is the function of tax? What's the purpose?
For the public good.
Okay, so you want to provide public goods. Okay, what else?
Defense, military.
Okay. So the state needs money. Okay, so if you're talking about function of taxation, the state needs revenue. It needs money. A government needs money in order to operate. So revenue. It needs money. What else? What else would the state need?
To regulate the distribution of wealth.
Right. So redistribution. Now, what does redistribution presuppose? It's a very interesting concept. We can accept that the state needs revenue to build hospitals, to build schools, to build infrastructure. Then there's a need to redistribute. So it assumes that when 100 people enter school, in a primary school, and 100 people are born, at the end of 25 years, at the end of 45 years, if we have to make an account and were to do some accounting of their whole life, you will find that the individuals that enter together or born together in the same year have very different outcomes. Outcomes depending on who perhaps you're born to, where you're born in, and what did you receive in the first 25 years of your life, and what did you do. So these outcomes seem to change the accounting of every individual across the world. But then within a country, within a village, within a town and a city, it seems to also diverge. If you remember all your classmates that enter school with you, some of you are lawyers, others are doctors, and yet others perhaps may end up with jobs that don't pay as well. So if we look at this distribution, it seems to assume that there's a certain amount of market failure, that everybody is supposed to attend the same classes, read the same materials, same opportunity to go to school, read the same textbooks, but yet the marks can be very different. The grades, the performance can be very different if you put them through the same common test. So we all accept one thing, that we are born unequal, and that equalizing our opportunities in society will not equalize the outcomes. So the fact that everybody has perhaps the same textbooks, go to same school, doesn't mean that you all end up with the same successful outcomes. And therefore, it appears that we all have accepted that there are winners and there are losers. And there are winners and losers in this entire system. And how do we then address and accept that there are losers in the system? Those who are strong, those who have greater ability, will have to bear the burden of those who have less. And so this whole concept, it's almost like capitalism and socialism. The whole idea is, why do we share? We share because the CEO is able to make, say, 10 million a year. He's enjoying the benefits of the work of all his workers, from his deputy all the way down to the cleaner at the bottom. So he enjoys the benefit of this corporation producing this amount of revenue, for which he's paid 10 million a year. And he doesn't enjoy the 10 million simply because he's worth that 10 million a year. It's because he leads a group who's willing to submit and accept the terms of their engagement. As a result, everybody performs their roles, and then the corporation earns $1 billion, for which he's rewarded for his role at 10M. Now, so this whole concept of redistribution accepts a market failure, accepts that those with broader and better ability must carry a bigger burden. Another function, anyone? What could be another function? Why would we, if I were to give you an island with 200,000 people to manage, what would you do? You know, you're the new prime minister of of the island, what would you do? Yeah. You need money. You need to redistribute. What else?
I think it's a good way to calculate the GDP.
Okay, so you need to calculate GDP. So basically, we are looking at economics. Now the funny thing is that if you just look at the way this COVID-19 virus has affected everybody, has disrupted the lives as well as the economy. It's a very interesting thing when you have time to actually reflect on it. Now, when there is fear and people are afraid of being infected, so they cut down contact activities. And then when people do that, they stay at home. What's the impact of stay at home? People stop going out. And when people stop going out, they don't spend money on transport. And when they don't go out, they don't spend money on the goods and services that they ordinarily would acquire when they're out. And when they don't do that, what happens? The whole transport system has a shortfall in revenue. So they can't, the 200,000 taxis are running around, unable to pick up any customers, and therefore it suffers a shortfall. The shops face the same fate. And when the shops face the same fate, they retrench the workers. And the workers who are retrenched then lose their livelihood. And then they start falling short. They are unable to pay the rent. And the landlord starts having a shortfall. And when the landlord starts having a shortfall, they are unable to pay the installments from the loans they borrowed from the banks. And the banks are unable to recover the installments. Then the bank's balance sheet goes into trouble. And when the bank's balance sheet goes into trouble, it starts retrenching its workers. And when it starts retrenching its workers, it may be unable to pay back the loans that the banks owe another bank. And you realize this goes on and on. And when the banks realize that people are not paying up their loans, they stop lending to businesses. And when businesses are unable to access capital, they are unable to expand, they are unable to pay, and customers are not buying from them, and investors are not lending to them. You realize the entire economy is built on one simple concept, that what we earned on the left hand, we have to spend on the right. So money is like we call money supply. An economy works because money flows. The minute money stops to flow, confidence breaks down, the entire economic framework fails. So it's all built on this idea we have to spend. You can't lock up capital. So money is meant to circulate. That's what we call circulation of money. The speed at which money circulates indicates the health of the economy. So I earn $100, I spend $10 on the taxi, I took a meal for $30, and I carry on after that, I bought some gifts, I went home, I'm left with $10. And I continue to earn tomorrow another $100. Then you realize when I spread my $100 of income out, which is my expense, becomes the income of the taxi driver, income of the shopkeeper, income of the manufacturer of toys from the sold to the shop that I bought from. So if you look at this, it's a very interesting cycle. So economy. So therefore, the management of the economy is very important. So how the economy is managed in the sense that who do you tax what? How much you tax the taxi driver? How much you tax the consumption VAT? How much you tax the shopkeepers? How do you want to tax the banks? How do you want to tax them differently? Affects the way the economy will function. So if you find that perhaps you need to incentivize a certain type of behavior, you want taxis to stop using petrol, you want to make them use electricity because that will cut down on pollution, because to have a combustion engine in every car is like having an electrical power plant. A mini power plant in every vehicle is very inefficient. Electricity produced at the big top-end power plants is far more efficient by at least 3 times compared to that in the car. So you want to incentivize that behavior. You say, all right, whoever invests in the electric vehicle investments will get a tax incentive. So that's how you use tax to alter behavior. You tax VAT at 5% for certain things that you consider essentials, 17% for those you consider luxury. So you want to alter behavior. That's how you manage economy. And last, if you want to manage economy, last we want to manage the society. So we want to manage the society. And we want to manage the society, what do we mean? Society is primarily made up of people, all of us. So the whole society behavior, you want to alter behavior of society. So, for example, a tax that alters behavior. Anyone? What would be a tax that alters behavior?
Maybe the sugar tax for some juice.
Right. Yes. Good. Sugar tax. Interesting. I just supervised a research paper on sugar tax. One engineering student came to me and hunted me down on the internet and said he's very interested in the concept of taxing sugar. And we did a research paper, 5,000 words, on whether a tax on sugar would work and what would the impact on tax on sugar, what would be the substitutes, what will manufacturers now put into your drinks, because sugar is a flavoring, it affects the taste. And you find that long time ago when sugar was added as an additive to make food taste good, what happened was that when sugar was not allowed for a certain period of time, people started adding fat, animal fat. And animal fat became one of those sources of flavor. And as a result, you saw a lot of goods contain a lot of cholesterol, animal fats. You start discovering that there is a problem. Why? Because the minute you ban A, manufacturers that need to protect that taste will find a substitute for A. So if you say, I can't take sugar, then you take maybe artificial sugar. Then the whole industry will create chemical equivalent for sugar that tastes like sugar. So Coke Zero. So you want to ask, what is that component that you're now drinking that is not sugar anymore? So is it more harmful to take the real sugar or to take the chemical equivalent of sugar? Like meat, right? We now have meat that is grown in the lab. Do you want to eat the animal meat or do you want to eat the meat that is manufactured in the lab? So a tax can actually alter behavior, but sometimes the response of industry could actually produce something worse than sugar itself. So you say tomorrow I tax salt. What will people add to food to preserve food? Salt is a preservative, just like sugar. They control taste and they control the longevity of food. So what would you do? Smoking, for example, there's a tax. So yesterday I was with a group of doctors trying to see whether we can implement a change in the law. Those children born after year 2020 can no longer smoke. So imagine we create a law that says that children born after 2020 cannot smoke. So they're trying to implement this concept to discriminate between generations. But in the meantime, we only tax tobacco, we tax alcohol, we tax petroleum. So when we impose tax on all these things, we also impose tax on gambling, right? So we decided that society will behave the way they want, but some behavior will create negative consequences. Pollution, health hazards, and perhaps a disruption of families through gambling. Now, because these are addictive behavior, you find that once it enters a society, enters a lifestyle, like opium, is impossible to get them out because of addiction. So it's a chemical response of the body. So what do? You make it less affordable. So you add cost. You add cost. And what do you mean by cost? You make it less affordable. So if I slap a 20% on alcohol, alcohol becomes more expensive, and that you hope to alter behavior. Next, you try to price the cost of negative externalities. So basically, when you add a tax to tobacco or to alcohol, you're basically trying to design a tax which reflects two things as a primary goal. First, you want to make it less affordable. You want to control that by either saying under 18, you can't smoke, you can't drink, because the liver is still too small or too young and unable to cope with this sort of chemicals. So you protect public health regulation, or you protect through economics. Next thing is, if studies show that basically people who smoke tend to get lung cancer, then the public hospitals have to use the revenues collected from here to help these people who smoke to recover. So it imposes a negative externality, a negative consequence on society that everybody has to bear. So now you want to smoke, I make you pay up front the costs that society has to bear 60 years down the road. And this is what we price the cost of negative externalities by your behavior. You get it? So this is how we try to alter society. So sometimes these are called sin taxes. Okay, sin taxes, because it's considered a form of vice, undesirable behavior. All right, so these are the primary functions for which we use taxation to run a society. So you will realize that actually, when we live in this society, whether it is wherever you are, so long as there's more than two human beings, you can't run away from the fact that you need to function this way. Man has not found any other alternative to organize a society up from the economics point of view, from the social point of view. So this is exactly how taxation will infiltrate every society. And it's difficult to live in a society without understanding the broader concerns of a organizing economy. Functions. Okay, are we good? Yep. Okay. And because today the materials are a little light and introductory, I'm not going to give as many breaks, and then we'll just carry on. When the content gets a bit more technical, then I will implement my 35-minute plus 10-minute break. Is that okay? Pretty straightforward. This is our introduction. Yeah. What's the canon of a good tax? In order for a tax, what would you define as a tax? So if we are asked to design tax, what will be considered a good tax? When you say canons, this basically what it means is that these are the basic principles on which we define a good tax. The way we define a good university, a good company, a good job. So same. When you say a tax has to be certain, in other words, you try to minimize uncertainty and ambiguity in the laws as to who must pay, how much to pay, when to pay, and pay for what. So the criteria on which the tax is imposed must be very clearly set out. But because language is imperfect and imprecise, it is difficult to achieve the absolute certainty. So very often you find that in practice you will struggle with the idea what is considered a perfect tax. Yeah, what's considered a perfect tax? It must be certain and it must be easy to administer. Easy to administer in the sense that you want to be able to say it cost 1 cent to collect $1, not 30 cents to collect $1. So if the enforcement, the cost of collecting the money is very, very inefficient, then it backfires. So it's not efficient. Next, we want the tax to be neutral. We want the tax to be as neutral as possible because we want to minimize distortions. Now, this is an important point and a very interesting one because you will recall just now when I talked about the sin taxes, it is meant to distort behavior. It's meant to distort the economy. When I talk about taxing the power plants, taxing electric vehicles less than petrol vehicles, we are trying to distort the economy. So the interesting thing is that yet a good tax should not distort. So how do we balance the two concepts? Why is it that high-tech companies are taxed at 15% in China and normal companies are taxed at 25%? That is distortionary. You are distorting market behavior because you favor certain companies at the expense of the others. So scholarship is a distortionary behavior. So we discriminate all the time. Yet, and we accept those are good things to have. Of course, our views can differ on whether scholarships are good and stuff like that. We can talk about it. But when you talk about tax neutrality, in the sense that you want to look at, say, for example, within the normal 25% tax rate, do you want to tax companies the same way as you tax partnerships, as the way you tax trusts within the same sector? So you do not want to create distortion in the sense that if a business decides to incorporate as a company, that he will pay a tax rate differently from, say, if you will organize it as a partnership. That would distort in the sense it will drive the behavior to then favor company rather than partnership. So that is distortion. So when we say neutrality as a concept on the textbook, like Adam Smith and all these will talk about what these are good, we are beginning to realize that many of the old concepts are no longer true. No longer true in the sense that what is neutral may not be good. So for example, just to take an example, if you're gone to a public cinema, after the show ends, you only see one thing, the toilets. After you exited the cinema, you see the toilets. And you know there's a long queue outside the female toilet, and there hardly any queue outside the male toilets. All right. So that's a very interesting thing, is that when we do not discriminate and distort, we end up having imbalance. Because ladies take a longer time in the toilets compared to the guys. All right. So if guys are able to use urinals, and until we invent a technology for the ladies, maybe we should have female toilets that are 4 times the size of male toilets, assuming, of course, equal number of females and males go to toilet. So the question is whether is neutrality and equality a good outcome, or are we supposed to go for equity instead of equality? So are we supposed to go for equity in a sense that what is fair rather than what is equal? So if I give you an example that is it equitable for a 7-year-old to run the same race as a 27-year-old? Some of you will say no. I say, well, that depends. If the 7-year-old is born with a set of lungs and his pulse rate is 45 per minute, whereas the 27-year-old's pulse rate is 92, then it is not unfair, because the 7-year-old will win a long race because his lungs are far more efficient than the 17-year-old or the 27-year-old. So When is it fair? When is it not fair? Why don't men and women compete in the same Olympic 100-meter run? We seem to accept that we are not born equal again, either by gender or by our bodies, even within the same gender. So neutrality that seems to assume a certain set of equalization. But equity as a concept seems to require us to consider what is fair. We distort behavior in the sense that, like, we talk about, a CEO has to pay a higher tax rate at 45% compared to the cleaner, maybe pay at 4%. Now that is distortionary. But how do we justify the distortion? So I want at this stage to now take a step back. We learn that society needs taxes, needs charges, has fines to regulate criminal behavior, penalties for regulating civil liabilities. So we have designed a system, and we design an economy that works. And we design principles to enable the state to collect revenues, and it's called taxation. And we say canons of a good tax. What are canons of a good tax? And we say, you need to do this. Then I want to ask, is it really, really good that, say, for example, that we redistribute or we don't distribute? How much we redistribute, how much we don't redistribute? Is it good to have a tax that's very certain? It depends on when you ask me. If you're talking about a tax that is for everybody to apply, then it has to be very simple. If you are then asking me as a tax lawyer, when I plan a transaction, and I say, the more certain the law is, the worse it is for the state. Because once the laws are very clear, I know exactly when tax has to be paid. I also would automatically know when taxes are not due. And because if I'm able to see clearly between black and white, I can plan a transaction. If I take a left turn, I have to pay a levy. If I take a right turn, it is free from levy. The behavior will be very clear. But if I'm unsure whether left and right turn will produce a better outcome, then that might affect behavior to do tax planning, tax avoidance. So sometimes when the law is uncertain, I've argued in several public lectures that when the law is uncertain, it's actually very good to discourage tax avoidance. I give an example. If you want to discipline your child and you use a cane, okay, let's say you use a cane for very bad behavior, whether at home or in school. You say, for example, if you miss school for consecutive 7 days without excuse, you get 1 stroke of the cane. And if you fight, you get 5 strokes of the cane. And if somebody is very badly hurt, you get 10 strokes in public. So you set down these rules very clearly. Everybody says, wow, that's a perfect system. Now, the minute I know what behavior attracts what kind of penalty, I will immediately find gaps. What is considered hurt? What's considered fighting? All right. If I trip my classmate, is that considered fighting, even though he's hurt? I won't punch him in the face, but as he's running by, I stick out my leg and he falls flat and he gets an injury, might be worse than a punch in the face. So once there is some form of very clear certainty, you score below 80 marks, I'm going to cane you. The kid will know that there is a bright line, there is a line of behavior that is both white and black. Now that is bad when there are very, very smart accountants and tax lawyers out there that will assist corporations to avoid the taxes because it's so clear. But when it's unclear, the school doesn't have clear rules about when caning will happen, the student will decide, gosh, if I do this, I don't know whether I'll be caned. Now, there is some fear and uncertainty on the part of the culprit that he has to decide whether he wants to engage in the behavior, because it is unclear whether he'll get the maximum 10 strokes, he'll get 5, or he'll get 1. And he's unable to compute the cost of doing that behavior. He might then have some form of control. Are you with me? So sometimes a certain tax is not very good. This is definitely good. It has to be very efficient. Then, is it good to distort, or is it not good to distort? So I want you to start thinking about whether a tax should really be neutral, and whether a tax should be fair or a tax should be equal. Same income, pay the same tax rates. A high tax 15%. Should all companies pay 15, or they remain at 25? Why do all countries seem to distort, and yet the textbooks keep saying you should be neutral? So there is a huge difference between the textbook and the reality. Yeah. So we say we should not discriminate on the Constitution, and we argue about human rights should be equal, and you say scholarship. This guy doesn't need to pay school fees. When I was living in Switzerland, there was a whole debate over dinner about scholarships. Equality, and I said men need to go for national service in the army, but women do not. And immediately says, "Oh gosh, that's so unfair. That's so discriminatory." Then I say, well, we also say that certain students who are top students do not need to pay school fees. Wow, that's discriminatory. So the whole reaction is very interesting. And the Swiss society is something you want to look at. It's a very interesting conception of what a society means. Remember, just not a society. You punish the people who smoke. You make it more expensive. People who drink. You seem to assume a certain cost in their behavior. And yet we seem to assume a certain benefit in high-tech companies being taxed at a better rate, which is lower than most. Yep, so think about that. Any comments, anyone? If not, it looks at we're good. Let's take a 5-minute break here before I come back to deal with classification of taxes. Okay, a 5-minute break.